Morning, church. In today's text, we have two simultaneous interrogations. One is happening inside between Annas and Jesus. The other is happening outside between Peter and a servant girl. It's compelling storytelling using a literary method called intercalation, if you're looking for new vocab today, where you begin a story, you interrupt it with another story, and then you finish the first story. And when you tell a story this way, by bouncing back and forth, you heighten the contrast between the two things that you're talking about. In this case, Jesus and Peter. And you can see kind of right next to each other the ways that they respond to the situations that they are in. And there is no doubt in the text as to which one we are to emulate. Jesus has just been arrested in the chapter prior, in the presence of his disciples on the Mount of Olives, where he had been praying following their Passover meal, and he has been taken to Annas to be questioned. There is a lot suspect with this situation if you look at it by the book. First of all, this is an interrogation happening under the cover of night. This is an off-the-books meeting. Second, it's not happening with Caiaphas, who is the actual active high priest, but rather with his father-in-law, Annas, the former high priest. Now, Annas would have held a position of respect and power, given his previous position, but since he is not an active member of the religious leadership, he is not really confined by the rules and can fish for damning information on Jesus, despite providing no charges or calling no witnesses. The systemic powers that had been tracking Jesus from the shadows and collecting information during his ministry have finally made their move. Oppressive powers will go along with the judicial system while it meets their needs, but are not afraid to pressure it, bully it, and compromise it when the results they are looking for are no longer in line with the justice that the court system was designed to protect. And Jesus is vulnerable. Peter is feeling vulnerable too. This has already been a bad night for him, and it's not going to get any better. To Peter's credit, he has followed Jesus and his captors to the high priest's courtyard, which is more than can be said for the other disciples. But he has a lot of talk to back up. Several chapters earlier, he told Jesus in flowery terms that he would lay down his life for him. And he thought he was on track for making good on that promise when he drew the sword in the Garden of Gethsemane. But Jesus did not only not rally behind Peter, he openly rebuked him. Peter is a willing weapon, but Jesus isn't looking for weapons. Jesus is looking for witnesses. And at that, Peter will fail. Adam Harrelson writes, "It is easier to sound strong when we stand behind strength." In the temple courtyard, Peter now stands by himself, without the weapons of the world. I think for us, even those of us who haven't drawn swords or lopped off ears, I think we can commiserate with Peter's aversion to vulnerability. We would all rather operate from positions in which we feel in control. Vulnerability opens us up to suffering, ridicule, shame. And we usually only agree to be vulnerable when we are assured that those things will not happen to us. I think that's a fairly natural human trait. I don't think it's unreasonable. It's hard to know what Peter was expecting to happen when he followed Jesus to the high priest's courtyard. But he certainly was not going to lay down and out himself to a group of strangers. Maybe there would be a chance to regroup and take up the fight from a more advantageous position. And so he denies, not because he is a bad person, but because he is unable to approach the moment with the radical vulnerability and transparency that it would take to say, yes, I am he. Yes, I am he are the exact words Jesus unflinchingly uttered in the Garden of Gethsemane when the detachment of soldiers said they were looking for Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus' response to his own vulnerability could not be more different than Peter's. When pressed by Annas about his teaching, Jesus does not become defensive or make apologies about his life's mission. Instead, he leads with it. I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogue or at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they'll know what I said. It's hard to interrogate something who refuses to be defensive. And by making the statement that he said nothing in secret, while also asking Annas why he is being questioned, Jesus is turning the tables and insinuating that by meeting by night in secret like this, perhaps it's the Jewish authorities that have something to hide. Otherwise, this trial would be happening during the day, as it should be, as was his right. Harrelson notes that power is a performance and Jesus is off script. Jesus has drawn no sword, but he also refuses to be compliant. Systemic powers rely on active or passive compliance. It's the way they get by with the things they do. They do not like being made to look weak and vulnerable. They do not like when their hypocrisy is brought to light. They do not like being taken off script from their sham rituals and empty posturing. And when powers lose control of the narrative, they respond with the only tool they really have, which is brute force and violence. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" he demanded. Jesus again refuses the easy path of quiet submission. If I said something wrong, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke truth, why did you strike me? Harrelson observes that this central contrast between Jesus' candor and Peter's cowardice illustrates Christ's commitment to a different kind of power. It is the power of truth and integrity that refuses to participate in the performance of fear and coercion, or to be driven into hiding by the suspicion of the world. While Annas' authority is fragile, propped up by secrecy and the threat of violence, Jesus' authority is inherent. While Peter hides, Jesus is open. He demonstrates that true power is not the ability to coerce, like Annas, or hide, like Peter, but the courage to remain governed by mission and truth, even when it leads to the cross. Now, in lifting out the differences between Peter and Jesus, I do not want to create an unfair of Peter as abject failure and Jesus as kamikaze hero. I think when we do that, it causes us to infer that only Jesus can do Jesus things, and therefore we're absolved from trying at all. Great job, Jesus. We'll just kind of sit back here and recognize that we're just kind of repeatedly the Peter in the story. After all, look what happened to Peter when he tried to do that. I think it's important to remember that Peter had plenty of other moments in the Gospels where he shines. It's unfortunate that he is remembered best by falling short in the biggest spot, but Peter will receive redemption. We sang about it in the second verse of our hymn earlier, eating fish with Jesus on the other side of the resurrection. And Peter will become the rock upon which the church will be built. And while we focus on this Lenten season on Jesus the martyr, which really is the season that we are in, who sacrifices all, denies nothing, and carries it all to the cross, it is not the only role that Jesus takes in his ministry. At Pastors and Leaders Week, a few weeks ago, Drew Hart, one of our keynote speakers, also the author of Trouble I've Seen and Who Will Be a Witness, which are two books that we have, identified that the scriptures not only show Jesus as martyr, but also Jesus as fugitive. Jesus' family flees to Egypt when Herod seeks to kill all the male Hebrew boys. He frequently told his disciples and others not to tell others what they had seen him do, as it was not the right time, presumably so that his ministry did not draw unwanted attention and end before it had a chance to begin. And if you map Jesus' movements more broadly in the Gospels, he does seem to move out from the cities when things become dangerous, preaching and teaching in the countryside to give things a chance to cool down before he returns. There is a pragmatist, fugitive side of Jesus to balance the seemingly reckless martyr side that we frequently emphasize. It reminds me of one of my favorite stories about Menno Simons, after whom the Mennonites take their name. Menno, who was a wanted man for his outspoken convictions, was traveling by stagecoach, sitting up with the driver, and officers galloped up and asked Menno, "Is Menno Simons in the carriage? We have a warrant for his arrest." Menno bent over from the top of the coach and called in, "Is Menno Simons in the carriage?" The people said no, so Menno addressed the horsemen. "They say that Menno Simons is not in the carriage." The officers galloped away and Menno's life was saved. Why do I share this story? As we walk with Jesus this Lent, we are aware that like Jesus, we are facing against foes and forces much bigger and more powerful than we are. And like Jesus and Peter, we are vulnerable. We also know that we are playing a long game. And we want to know what faithfulness looks like and what is pleasing to God. And it's helpful to consider that Jesus lived as a fugitive for much of his ministry to fulfill what God called him to do, that he did not actively seek out death for himself or for his followers, and yet he was willing to step into the role of martyr when the time was necessary or perhaps unavoidable. Where Peter flinched away from his vulnerability, Jesus leaned into it, claimed it as power, and accepted its inevitable consequence. In our dissonant journey, may we claim our own vulnerability and allow for God to use it as strength. May we know when to play the fugitive, and may we have the courage to step into the role of martyr when the time calls for it. Amen.